I remember when we bought our first Bitcoin in 2020, I figured the floodgates were open. If we're moderately successful in 5 years, our Bitcoin business will go from being worth 100 billion to a trillion, moderately successful.
Hello, everyone. I am here at Strategy HQ with President and CEO Phong Lee. Today, we're going to talk about strategy. We're going to talk about Bitcoin. We're going to talk about business analytics. We're going to talk about AI, cool sneakers, everything. So I'm just going to get into it. I'm really excited to be here. Phong, thank you for inviting me to HQ, and I really appreciate being here.
Adrian, thanks for coming. Thanks for all the work that you have done in the Bitcoin space and with formerly MicroStrategy, now Strategy, and with True North. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to get right into it because I've got the perfect story, as I was just mentioning. So in the flight over here, it got delayed, and a older lady saw my sneakers, the Strategy sneakers, which I don't know if you are aware are going for $2,000 on eBay.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. So that's another segue that we can get into later about the impact the strategy is having culturally. But she saw the Strategy B on the back, and she said, "What's Strategy B mean?" And I had to get into Bitcoin. I had to get into what strategy was. I had to get into just overall what it means in terms of in the market and what strategy is actually doing. And we actually got into the topic of preferreds. I mentioned that your big initiative is preferred offerings. She had no idea what a preferred offering was. So we got into the concept of a dividend. We got into a concept of paying a monthly dividend or a quarterly dividend. And that was something that she was very interested in. The reason why I bring that up is this. It's very interesting to me that on X, I see a lot of individuals that are my age, so millennials and younger, very, very interested in the preferreds. Now, in a random conversation with a woman that's clearly in retirement age, she's also very interested in preferreds. She was interested in the quarterly preferred in Stride, and Strife, and she's also interested in the monthly in Stretch. Does that surprise you that it has such broad appeal, or is that what Strategy was hoping on?
Well, I think when you think about Bitcoin and its appeal as a store of value that's non-sovereign and supply limited, and you think about digital assets and their appeal as a medium of exchange broadly, we focus on Bitcoin and securitizing Bitcoin. And when you get into the world of public equities and public debt, and public prefers, which is a hybrid product. What Bitcoin provides is access to superior returns and superior volatility with our equity, MSTR, which generally speaking performs, I call it 1.5 to 2x Bitcoin returns, 1.5 to 2x Bitcoin volatility. And not everybody wants that, right? And so if you think about the world of securities, there's also things that are public debt and public hybrids. And those offer lower returns, lower volatility, more downside protection. And hybrids are somewhere in between. So it's not a surprise to me that if you strap these public securities to Bitcoin, that number one, everyone learned and liked the performance and volatility of MSTR. And then there are people out there that want different return profiles, different fixed income profiles, the person that you met on the plane. Right. And so if you think about the entire market, the debt and equity market, we need a product that addresses all of them that are backed by Bitcoin. And that was the realization, the unlock the last 5 years, that when you strap securities to Bitcoin, they provide better performance, whether it be a public equity, a public hybrid, or a public debt. And so it doesn't surprise me. And of course, we happened upon all of this. We've transformed the capital markets essentially by strapping things to Bitcoin. And that's the great thing about Bitcoin. You strap a pair of sneakers to Bitcoin and then everybody loves them all of a sudden. You strap an iPhone, you make it orange. Thank you, Tim Cook, to the Bitcoin color orange. And I think it's probably selling better than they expected it would sell. Oh, right? So you put anything and you put Bitcoin behind it. You put a company, you put a public equity, you put a public debt, you put public prefers, you put convertible notes, you put Bitcoin behind it, and it performs better. And so there are different people with different investing profiles. There's me, there's you, there's institutions. And then there's the woman you met on that plane. And I think at some point in time, people realize that you strap any security to Bitcoin, it's going to perform better. It's going to give you better returns. And in some cases, it's going to give you better dividends and better fixed income, which is likely what she's looking for.
Absolutely. I think it reflects quite a few things. I mention often that on my live streams that I talk to my dad about Bitcoin a lot. He's a man in his 80s and very, very different generational profile. But one of the things that I've been able to do to get him, get him into the fold, so to speak, first with IBIT and now potentially with preferreds, is at his age, he doesn't want to risk money, but he also doesn't, he's not opposed to having an idea of getting a dividend, having money coming in. So for him, something like one of the preferreds is great because it can be a monthly expense that he just takes off of his docket and he doesn't have to worry about. That's one of the things that appeals to him. The woman that I spoke to on the plane, she was very, very similar. She thinks that on a monthly occurrence, if she had a dividend coming in that didn't put a lot of her capital at risk, that'll be something that she's very interested in. Then on the flip side, as I mentioned on X, we have a lot of younger individuals, especially with the listing on Robinhood now, that are very, very interested in the preferreds. I think that people are really underestimating the impact that the preferreds can have in terms of scaling and in terms of broad appeal. So there's a two-part question I have with that. One, the listing of the preferreds on Robinhood I thought was huge because they, to my knowledge, never had another preferred listing. And it shows that the leadership at Robinhood was really paying attention to the community and the demand was there. And because the demand was there, they made the decision rather quickly, I would think, given the age of the preferreds, to list them on Robinhood. What does that say to you in terms of their potential? Because we talked about appeal, but I think potential is being grossly underestimated. That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how big do you think they can get? I know that Michael Saylor's talked about completely taking a chunk of all these different markets and having them be served by the preferred offerings. I don't want to put you on the spot to say how long do you think that would take, but what kind of a vision does the strategy have for that in terms of, one, it's obviously achievable, two, it's obviously attainable, but how long do you think it's going to take? Because there are a lot of investors wondering, well, why haven't the preferred scaled yet? And they're, in my view, being somewhat impatient. What kind of a timeline do you have internally, if at all?
Yeah, so let's start with what our preferreds do for, call it the millennial retail investor, those who are on Robinhood, those who are on X. You go back to sort of this premise that Bitcoin actually lowers folks' time preference and encourages people to save because now you can save your money in something that is supply limited, is not going to continue to inflate, and is a great store value, right? You start there. And what problem are these preferred solving? They're solving the problem that if you're a 25-year-old and you have $10,000 saved away in your bank account and you don't really want to risk it on public equities because this is going to be your retirement savings, and frankly, it's the only thing you have right now, you didn't really have an alternative to savings in the past. You could put it into your bank account and earn nothing, right? Likely that's what you're getting from whatever bank account you have. You can put it in a money market and earn 4%, which is 2.5% after taxes. Those weren't attractive avenues for savings. And so for the most part, what you do, you put in your DoorDash order, you Uber everywhere you go, you maybe buy a vehicle with a lease, you go out with friends and you spend the money, right? Because there's really no reason to save that money. And so what a preferred that gives you, 10.25% dividend paid monthly, tax deferred, is something that you put your savings into. And I think it's amazing that 20-year-olds, those in their 20s and their 30s now are looking at this as an avenue for actually saving money and creating wealth. And not everybody wants to go risk it on the 2x levered MSTR, right? I totally get that. They want something that looks like it looks like a bank account that's paying 10.25%. So I think that's awesome. We talked to the folks at Robinhood about listing our preferreds, and there is a technical requirement. There's a technical work that needs to be done, development work, to be able to support a preferred instrument which pays dividends, whether it be quarterly or monthly. That's a lot different than listing the next additional equity. And I don't know what happened within Robinhood and the reason for the decision making that Vlad and team had to list our prefers, but clearly they're listening to their customer base and there was demand for this. The same people who are previously not saving anything now saying I have an avenue to save and to earn income on it. So I think that's really exciting that they were moving that quickly. And what Robinhood is a great technical platform. I'm on the app. It's better than most other apps out there. And so it's a great platform because they're listening to their customers. So I think it's awesome what they did to not just list our prefers, but now they have a platform in which they can list prefers in general. And hopefully what we've done with the preferred market is what we did with the Bitcoin treasury company market, what we do with the convertible bond market. We're going to transform it over time. So it'll be a great business decision for them, not just because of our current 4 preferreds, but for future ones. Where is this all going? We launched our first preferred strike 8 months ago, right? And sometimes I have to take a step back. We launched Stretch, which we think is going to be the largest because of its market appeal 3 months ago. So we all sometimes, to your point, Adrian, I've heard you talk about this, have some perspective, right? We have to take a step back. I remember when we launched, when we bought our first Bitcoin in August of 2020, and a month later, Jack Dorsey and Square, then now Block, announced that they bought Bitcoin. And I believe it was March of 2021 where Tesla announced that they bought Bitcoin. I figured the floodgates were open, right? Like I started talking to all these corporate treasurers, corporate CFOs, CEOs, board members, numbering in the dozens. And I just figure in 2021, we were going to have 50, 100, 200 companies with Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And I was wrong, right? And what it took were founder-led tech CEOs, Michael Saylor, Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, and others to take that leap. And it took essentially 4 to 5 years before we hit the tipping point of companies putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Now we go into the preferred market, right? Bitcoin-backed prefers and what we've done now with 4 different preferreds. We know the entire market is about $30 trillion. Money markets, savings accounts, bank accounts, et cetera. It's about $30 trillion. We believe, I think realistically, what can we get of that? Well, 1% of $30 trillion would be $300 billion. Could we get $30 billion of that market? I think we could, right? Now, how long can it take? I'm a consummate optimist. And like if you had asked me when we launched Stretch, how long would it take for Stretch to season to be trading at par value $100? I might have said a couple weeks, right? A month, right? I also believe in liquid and reasonably perfect markets. And so I would have guessed that Stretch would have traded to $100 right away. It hasn't, right? We need to see that happen. We need to see the market season. When can we see, $30 billion worth of preferreds, $300 billion worth of preferreds? It's hard to guess, right? But what I do know is I know we have a product in these preferreds, and we have a market like those on X, like the lady you were sitting next to on the plane that wants the product. We have a product and we have a market, and we have to match those things together. We're a product market fit, right? And that, as a software person and a technologist, what you create doesn't always have product market fit. You might have a great product, nobody wants it. You might have a market for a product and you can't create the product. We have a product that the market wants and a market demand that has a product. And when you create something like that, I believe there will be growth. I believe it'll season. I believe it'll mature. I think we'll be sitting here a year from now and starting to see not just the maturation of these prefers in the market, but other companies doing the same thing. And so that's what's exciting about it. And I think Stretch is absolutely, at the tip of the spear, I think is the most interesting of the preferreds that we've created and will have the highest demand.
I'm inclined to agree just because the bulk of the questions that I typically get on X fall into two categories. One, what do you think the price is going to do, obviously? And two, about the preferreds. There are a lot of individuals that have actually reached out to me and said that they have no exposure to MSTR. They have a full exposure to the preferreds. They have their money sitting in them in strike and strife and stretch, and they are quite content playing it out for a long period of time, getting that dividend, riding that appreciation as they scale, that minimal appreciation as they scale. And that is their investment plan. And that has been something that's been very surprising to me, because there are a lot of individuals that are my age and older that are saying the same thing. And I think that with what you mentioned about, typical savings accounts and typical money market accounts and typical investment vehicles, they do have a level of risk where they have a level of low return. With Bitcoin-backed securities, it can give you the best of both worlds in a way. And I think that as they scale, they'll become more apparent. But I want to pivot to something else that's related, but more of a fun topic. So your video production manager made me aware that the strategy dunks were going for over $2,000 on eBay. I didn't believe it. I had to look, and they absolutely are. We have also Apple, as I know you have the same phone as I do. Apple has the orange iPhone. Now, I don't think that was coincidental. I think that was very, very deliberate. I mentioned that to say this. You now have the strategy merch store. You have orange iPhones. You have sneakers that are going for $2,000 on eBay. Strategy has become a bit of a cultural movement in a way. You have a very, very impassioned investor base on X that cuts both ways. Yeah, because with passion comes criticism, and with passion comes dedication. Did you anticipate this kind of a cultural movement in terms of what strategy was doing, being a result of what strategy was doing? Because you have the Irresponsibly Long community, you've got True North as a result, you've got all these individuals that have made I don't want to say a career, but built a following around just covering strategy. And as a result, covering the other Bitcoin treasury companies as well, which in my very, very direct view is a direct offshoot of strategy. Did you see this coming? Did you think it was going to be just another part of the Bitcoin ethos? Or did you really see it becoming its own thing? Because the Bitcoin treasury companies now very much so are their own community versus the broader Bitcoin community. Is that something that you anticipated happening?
Yeah, if you go back to 2020, there were certain things we were hoping for, and there were certain things that we did not at all expect. We were hoping that we would strap our company to an asset class that was growing faster than any other asset class in the world, and that would continue to happen. And because of primarily the technical characteristics of Bitcoin, that we're going to do very well as a security, and we're going to outperform our historical performance, and we're going to outperform the S&P 500, and we're going to outperform the Max 7. We're hoping those things. We're also hoping that it would open up a retail base of customers and investors that were interested in the underlying asset class Bitcoin. And we even created some models of what that might mean in terms of share price return. As you know, Bitcoin, all our models were broken. We didn't even come close. The anticipation of what was going to happen in terms of the passionate retail and institutional investor base, we didn't anticipate that. We anticipated we were going to put Bitcoin on our balance sheet. We didn't anticipate we're going to become a Bitcoin treasury company with Bitcoin-backed leverage and Bitcoin-backed securities and Bitcoin-backed convertibles and Bitcoin-backed secured notes, and all of that was not anticipated. But on the other hand, we were ready to sort of catch the waves of opportunity that came our way. The merch store is a good example, right? Like, I'm not trying to make money off the merch store. It's just a fun thing, right? Like, what better way to give back to our community than doing interviews, mics on hundreds of different podcasts, talking to our community directly. That's why I'm doing this. We figure the merch store is just a fun thing to do, to give back to our community. The people in the company that work on it, no one has it as their dedicated job. It's a side gig, right? Like the person running the website, using our platform, he's got a day job. The person who's buying the merchandise, she's got a day job. The person who's running her inventory, he's got a day job. So if you think about the fact that inside the company, there's all these people who just like working on things Bitcoin related that aren't directly applicable to their day job. Like, did somebody whose job is basically to train salespeople realize 5 years ago they're going to help decide what merch to sell in our store? No, but that opportunity came because of Bitcoin. And so, I like to just Bitcoin, it just opens doors. It's like the conversation you had with the person on the plane. You probably want to talk to her otherwise, right?
It was very, very random.
Yeah. And so it just opens doors for conversations and opportunities. And what are we going to be doing in 5 years? I don't know exactly. But I know there will be things that come along as we identify innovations and we find a product and we find a market and they come together because of Bitcoin. And that's what's exciting about it all.
I would agree. Speaking of innovation, one of the things I wanted to touch on is, and I know you had this as a topic in your interview with Tim Kotzman, but people really underestimate Strategy's broad history of trailblazing, especially in the business analytics field. Give us a quick overview of that again, please. And the reason why I bring it up is one of the things I've been fairly, I guess you can say, bullish on is the potential for the BI side of the business to scale and become its own real scalable, highly more successful business than it already has been. I think there's real opportunity there. Give the audience, if you can, a quick overview of some of the trailblazing that Strategy has done in their history. And then I'm going to use that to pivot into where I think Strategy can go. And I'd love to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I have the good fortune of spending about half my time on our software business and half our time on our Bitcoin business. And it's the most fun thing in the world to be able to context shift between those two things on a not even daily basis, but on an every 30-minute basis. And the software business in its own right is a very successful business, to your point. If I told you that you could start a enterprise analytics business that has 1,500 employees, that counts nearly half of the S&P 500 in the U.S. as its customers, has a valuation of, call it $2 billion, and has a retention rate of about 95%, everyone said, done. My career is done. I'm happy. I need nothing else. And that's what Michael Saylor built essentially in about 15 years. From 1989 in our founding, we went public in 1998. Some of the innovations is if you hear the terms business intelligence, back in the day it was decision support systems. Like, we largely invented the space. Michael largely invented this space. We were the first to, if you ever use any web application that has a semblance of analytics on it, we were the first in 1998 to provide enterprise analytics on the web. If you're using a mobile application and you have any semblance of enterprise or just general analytics on it, we were the first to do that. 2008, we were the first to launch mobile analytics. We were one of the first analytics companies in the cloud in 2012. So we have this, to your point, rich history of innovation. Now, you can probably count amongst it 50 to 100 things that didn't work out. But every 10 years, we invented something brand new. And so, you get to 2020 and we invent putting our balance sheet in a Bitcoin. It's just another major technology innovation, bold move. But the enterprise analytics space has been fun. It's what allows us to have a video crew, right? Like if we were just a Bitcoin treasury company, we probably wouldn't invest in a video crew, a studio, this building here, great headquarters. We support our Bitcoin hub. So those two things together do have an important codependence that I don't think people quite recognize what it is to be a mature software company that also has a Bitcoin strategy.
I would agree. Which leads me to my other question. As I mentioned, I'm very bullish on the potential for the BI side of the business to scale. And I say that for a few reasons. In my day job, as we briefly touched on, one of the two main areas that I typically help clients and customers with ties to data analytics, data conversion, system integration, and then onboarding of AI tools. There's a lot of overlap with those two. And that's because most of the companies, they see Gemini, they see Claude, they see ChatGPT. They want to make a chat bot. They want to integrate it, which is great, which is very, very valid, and a very useful use of time. But they're not ready to take that step. They're not ready because the data is not ready. They're not ready because their data hasn't been cataloged and itemized and hasn't been structured. They don't have a data methodology. They don't have any of the necessary scaffolding to make that next leap. And the reason why I bring that up is, and I want to get your thoughts on, that is I think strategy has a very, very big opportunity in the data integration, AI onboarding tools area. I think those verticals are very, very underrepresented in the market, just because of what I do and just because of the client load that I see and others in my relative field see. Are these areas that strategy is even looking at, or better yet, what are some areas that strategy could be looking at for the business analytics side of the company to scale it and to make it grow? Because my assumption is that's still going to be part of your future going forward. So what do you see in that future?
Yeah, I'll start with, I do think our software business has a great opportunity to grow and scale. And what's fantastic about the marrying of an operating company and a Bitcoin treasury company is, although our operating company has a great opportunity to grow and scale, it doesn't have to. And because we don't have to, it actually causes the likelihood of the business growing and scaling to increase, right? When you're a standalone operating business, a public company, the desperation and the need to provide quarterly results that are short-term focused and hitting certain earnings numbers, hitting certain revenue growth numbers, obsessing every single quarter on what your investors think, what your analysts think, detract significantly in a technology company from the core focus, which should be creating great product, creating a great sales and distribution channel, marketing channel, servicing that product and supporting that product and innovating over the long term. Which is why, by the way, you see a lot of technology companies not accessing the public markets. They stay private because when you're private, you can focus on the long term, which is making great product. When you become public and you focus on the short term, what do you end up doing? You end up with inorganic M&A. You'll buy somebody. You'll end up with short-term revenue pressures, eking out margins, getting from 15 to 20% margins, reducing your costs, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that's a great forum, a great hotbed for technology innovation. So what's happened in the last 5 years with strategy on our software business is we've been able to focus on innovation. We were the first BI company to offer fully integrated AI. Now, to answer your question, where is this all going? Absolutely. We have been in the world, in the space of creating semantic models, business definitions of data, right? And so you might put your data in database, you might put your data in data warehouse, but you need to define that data in a business manner that is secure, that's scalable, and that a business person can come in without knowing SQL or without knowing how to code, accessing that data and making decisions out of it. What happens in the world of AI? The need for business definitions of data that are secure and scalable increase a millionfold, right? You'll have 1,000 agents making 1,000 decisions a day. Over time, you'll have 1 million agents making 1 billion decisions a day, all needing to access data that is informed by business language and that's secure and that's scalable. And so that's what we're doing. We're building out a universal semantic layer that we've been doing for the last 30 years and making accessible to every AI agent, every potential user. We call it Mosaic. And this is the unlock. This is the unlock, right? Because other companies are doing it at the data level, which is fine. But an agent wants to access it at the business level. And that's what we're doing. And I think there's a huge growth opportunity there. And we're able to focus on this because we have Bitcoin as our sort of as our invisibility cloak, if you will, to let us run our business, our software business, the way we want to. It's just another advantage of Bitcoin. There are so many advantages of sort of adding Bitcoin to your balance sheet as a company. This is just another one.
And what you mentioned there is actually an important distinction, the agentic level and the data level. What I do is at the data level, helping clients get to that next level. And that's one of the reasons why I become so very, very bullish on the potential for what strategy can do, because you don't need to become Microsoft. You don't need to become Palantir. You don't need to be that big. You can scale several orders of magnitude and still not be that size and still have a disproportionate return on that investment. And I think that is something that people are really, really underestimating. And it's one of the reasons why I always say have a longer term view. The focus right now is the Bitcoin business, obviously. But I think that in the coming years, and this is just my naive personal view, the business analytics business is going to become more and more important as this AI build out takes place. And I mentioned that to get into this. I know that we mentioned briefly about how big can the preferreds get. Let's take it a step further. It's 2025 right now. It's 2030. You and I are sitting down either here or wherever else, and we're having another interview. What would be your dream state? Let's go fully optimistic because you're optimist. Let's go that route. Where will the BI business be? And I don't mean dollar amounts. Where will the BI business be in terms of scale, in terms of market share? Where will the Bitcoin side of the house be in terms of market share? Not necessarily numbers, but just in terms of overall impact and overall growth of the company and overall trajectory of the company. I know you want to grow, but I'm sure you have some general idea of how much you would like to grow in the next 5 years.
Yeah. The funny thing will be is if we're moderately successful in 5 years, our Bitcoin business will go from being worth 100 billion to $1 trillion, moderately successful. And if we're moderately successful on a software business, it'll go from being worth 2 billion to 20 billion. And the question I'll get from everybody, I get the question now from our software folks. So you have a $2 billion software business and $100 billion total enterprise value, roughly. Do you care about software? And I say, of course, we care about both. Like, they're both important. One is less material than the other to our shareholders. And 5 years from now, I'll have a $20 billion software business on a $1 trillion enterprise. And everyone will ask the same question. And then when we're a $10 trillion enterprise, however X many years from now, and we're running a $200 billion software business, we'll still have the question. And all of those are questions I welcome and are good problems to have. But I think these markets are huge. I think the Bitcoin market, the Bitcoin-backed credit market especially, is a massive market that we can go address. And I think the enterprise software and the AI-enabled enterprise software market are massive markets. And they're both great. They're complementary to each other for a variety of reasons, people-related, capability-related, and structural. And that's why it's fun to work in both areas. It's a great opportunity. It's a great privilege.
Yeah. And so with regards to the preferreds, coming back to that, you just reminded me of a question. In terms of the scaling of the preferreds, one of the questions that I got, I want to say about a week ago, someone wanted me to ask, and I think it's a fair question. Is there any concern that the preferreds have taken away some interest from the common? Or do you see it more along the lines of having the diverse investor base that will serve you more in the long run? And I say that because, as I mentioned, many people have come to me saying that they don't have any exposure to MSTR. They only have exposure to preferreds. Do you think that is a risk, or do you think that is something that you'll have to balance, that will balance out naturally as the preferred scale and as the company scales and as this model scales out in the future?
I'll start with that. I don't think a Bitcoin-backed equity market competes with what people generally use preferreds for, which is a Bitcoin-backed credit market, right? It's like, I own MSTR, I own some of our preferreds, I own a house, I have money in a money market, which I'm moving as much as I can into preferreds. And so I have different securities and different investment vehicles, depending on what my needs are, right? And I think it's okay if someone owns MSTR and STRC. And frankly, I think it's okay if you own MSTR, STRF, STRD, STRC, STRK. I think they're different products for different people. We were talking about the phone. You have an iPad, you have an iPhone. Like, should you have both? That's your call. You probably have a Mac too, MacBook, right? Like, and so now, should Apple have 100 products? No. Do they have 10 really good products? Yes. Do we need 100 different securities? No. Do we need probably 10 or whatever that number is? Yeah, because I think there's audience that want different products. Now, what's great using Apple as an analogy is their ecosystem of products support each other, right? Like the AirPods, which you probably own too, and the watch, right, wouldn't really work if it wasn't for the phone, right? What our preferreds do is they support the common. Ultimately, it's the common MSTR that's sort of the alpha of our securities. And then we have other products that support them, right? What's going to make, you saw this happen with our convertible bonds while we're in that market, right? They created leverage. They allowed us to buy Bitcoin with less dilution up front, and it helped the equity, right? They also created more volatility, helped the equity, right? The more we see these preferreds work, the more it's going to help the equity, right? What happens initially is if we're able to issue, which we did, $2.5 billion of stretch, the first thing we did is we turned around zero dilution, right? So 100% accretive to Bitcoin yield, and we bought $2.5 billion of Bitcoin. That helps the equity, right? And it actually helps everything that's senior to it, and so it also helps Stripe. So Stripe price up as a result of that. So the preferreds are all part of a capital stack. And by the way, when we go and turn around and buy $2.5 billion of Bitcoin, not only does it help MSTR because it's 100% accretive to BTC yield, it also helps Bitcoin, right? Because it creates more demand. It helps the entire Bitcoin treasury company ecosystem because they're all like, oh, there's a non-dilutive way, upfront non-dilutive way to acquire Bitcoin. Now it's harder for them to enter the preferred market because they don't have the scale. They don't have the history of execution. They don't have the management team, as an example. But I don't think, it's Michael and others will say it's the tyranny of the or, MSTR or STRC. I say this to my kids all the time, and my wife, they're always, do you want to do this or that? I'm like, can we do both? You want me to do well on my test, or you want me to clean my room? Why is it an or? It's an and. And I think MSTR and STRC and STRF and STRD and STRK together create an ecosystem that will allow us to be more successful for all of our shareholders.
And that's actually a model that I've used, the ecosystem model. I've said that strategy is built on an economy around Bitcoin. And I think that's a very, very apt model. But it's a model that economies of scale, they are called that for a reason. They have to scale. And I think it's going to take time for it to scale. And that brings me to my next question. Let's talk about Bitcoin now. Just in the last 18 months, Bitcoin has gone through what I like to call a transformation. You have the ETFs that got approved. You have a presidency that seems to be far more appreciative of crypto and Bitcoin. I like to separate the two. You have all kinds of legislative barriers that existed in the past that seem to be falling to the wayside. And Bitcoin has been ranging at 100K around that range for quite some time now, since like May, I believe. I'm curious about what your thoughts and feelings are on where Bitcoin is going. And I don't mean like a price prediction. It seems to me that we've hit like a watershed moment in terms of Bitcoin adoption, and that curve is going to slowly tick up now, especially with the ETFs, especially with strategy being a trailblazer, especially with the Bitcoin treasury companies that exist. Where do you see Bitcoin going in terms of adoption? Do you think that we've cleared those final hurdles and it's now just a matter of, quote unquote, orange pilling enough people? Or do you think that there's still other hurdles that may come in Bitcoin's future in terms of broader adoption, in terms of hitting that escape velocity that we all think and hope is coming?
Yeah, I think you'll know Bitcoin's time has really come when you speak to that person on the plane. And they're like, oh, I know what Bitcoin is, and I know why it's important. And I can purchase Bitcoin on my Wells Fargo bank account. And I can custody Bitcoin through Wells Fargo. And I get yield on my Bitcoin when I custody it with Wells Fargo, just as an example. And I think that's why the ongoing legislation, the Genius Act, the Clarity Act, perhaps the Bitcoin Act, are so important because when Bitcoin is introduced to the masses via traditional banking, when TradFi intersects with Bitcoin is when we'll see that big next wave of adoption. And I don't think we're that far off, right? I think each of the traditional banks entering the stablecoin market, which we've already seen. I think Societe Generale, a French bank, announced the first US dollar-backed stablecoin recently. I think that's the banks wading into the digital asset space. I think the next step will be for traditional banks to offer Bitcoin and digital asset custody services as a huge unlock. They're starting to think about it. There are still a lot of uncertain or undefined legislative and regulatory actions and clarity to be created. When that's created and you see JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, the largest retail banks in the US offer custody services, and I don't think we're that far out, 1 to 2 years out. Then when they can custody Bitcoin, that essentially means, one, a company like Strategy or any large institution for that matter can turn to a counterparty that has that's much, that's a traditional US bank, provides lower risk profiles to custody their Bitcoin, but an individual retail owner of US dollars and checking and savings accounts can now say, oh, JP Morgan Chase allows me to put Bitcoin on my balance sheet, essentially. And then they offer custody services. Then they offer yield services. Then they offer loans that are Bitcoin backed. I don't think we're that far off. 2 years ago, I would have thought we were really far off. Now we're not far off. And when we cross that barrier of traditional finance intersecting with Bitcoin backed banking, I think that's going to be a huge unlock. And you're already seeing some initial signs of that. And I think when that happens, it's about more people getting exposure to Bitcoin, but it's about a pretty large class of citizens in the US that won't even touch the asset category. And I don't think we're far off from that. And that's pretty exciting.
I think you're correct. One of the benchmarks that I've mentioned in several conversations now is, and it's funny you mentioned JP Morgan Chase. When I can go into Chase, take my Bitcoin, custody with them, and get a loan against it, I think that moment is going to be very, very transformative, because when you have an entirely new asset class, it's not as if you're doing the buy, borrow, die approach that people do right now. They have a bunch of equities. They go into, Fidelity, whomever, and say, I want a loan against this, and they pay the interest on it, and then they just roll that in perpetuity. That's a very common thing, but it's not very, very well known. Bitcoin is very well known by the average citizen. When the average citizen is exposed, in my view, to that kind of a reality where they have their asset, where they have that digital commodity that they can go into a bank and borrow against it, I think it changes what we can do in terms of broad adoption, in terms of market perception. And with regards to the risk profile that you mentioned, and this isn't me slandering anyone, this is not like a BlockFi or an FTX kind of a situation. It's going to be in a highly regulated environment. I think that truly is a moment that will be very disruptive, but in a good way. That said, I'm going to put you on the spot with one thing. Bullish predictions. Do you have any for the future in terms of Bitcoin? Everyone's talking about what the price action is doing right now. I'm not really interested in that. But, Michael Saylor has mentioned that $13 million number. People have mentioned, I call it the stairway to heaven, that we can get to $1 million in a stair-step fashion in the next 8 to 10 years. Do those seem still realistic for you? And along those lines, what do you think you're going to feel when that moment actually hits? I know that you probably own Bitcoin personally. I know that Strategy obviously owns hundreds of thousands and will own hundreds of thousands more by that point. What do you think that's going to mean for you in terms of, one, validating your approach, and two, personally? Because for me, I know it would mean that all of the ups and downs of the cycles and all of the money I put towards it have been worthwhile. You guys have been trailblazers that are taking a lot of knocks. I think in that moment, it would have to be a moment of massive vindication.
Yeah, it's to me, life isn't about vindication. I've been alive long enough and had successes and failures and a wife and kids and all those types of things. So it's not about proving someone right or proving someone wrong. It's about advancing, in many cases in my career, technology for the good of others. That could be your employees, that could be your shareholders, that could be your customers, that could be the broader community, that could be broader society, it could be governments. I do think we'll hit 1 million. I don't really think it's a matter of if or when. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Hitting 100K was a big milestone. Threw a big party and we moved on, right? Like it's then how do you get to 1 million? I'm sure when we get to 1 million, it'll be how do we get to 1 billion or get to 10 million? I guess probably after 1 million. And my bold prediction isn't one of price; it's the next milestone. I think a large bank will offer Bitcoin-backed custody services by the end of 2026, and that's important for the asset class, but it's important. It's even more important for individuals, right? Today, we live in a little bit of a bubble, but when I meet somebody who doesn't know what Bitcoin is, I convince them to buy Bitcoin. Their next question is, how do I buy it? And the answer shouldn't be so complicated as, well, you could go on Coinbase or you can buy it on Robinhood, but you're not really owning the Bitcoin if you buy it on Robinhood. And if you want to consider, you could do an ETF, but they charge high fees. And then you could buy MSTR, but I can't advise you to buy MSTR. So I don't know. Right? Like there's no great answer. And then I can say, well, you could self-custody and buy a hardware wallet. And let me explain to you like how that works. And they're like, do I have to remember my password? 'Cause it's just so complicated. It's way too complicated. And here we are, right? Bitcoin price is over $100,000 and it's still not easy to buy for somebody who is afraid of the asset class.
Someone brand new. Yeah.
Someone brand new and someone who primarily listens to a lot of FUD about it, which is what's out there. So I think being able to buy the asset class through a bank that you already have a relationship with, and it's as easy as going onto your app and transferring it from your checking account to Bitcoin, like the experience of Square's Cash App, right? Or like the experience that you might have if you're buying Bitcoin or an ETF via your Fidelity account, like something as seamless as that experience, but for the 98% of people who primarily operate through a traditional bank checking account. So I think that milestone next year, I think that will lift the asset class up significantly and put us well on our way to $1 million.
That actually does make sense in terms. Stop focusing on price, but focus on milestones. I think that really does make sense. Because when the ETFs launched, for example, everyone was focused on, well, are we going to rip to 100K right now? Instead of focusing on the fact that BlackRock, Fidelity, all of these massive institutions adopting Bitcoin opened up the floodgates for all sorts of adoption. And I think you're right that perhaps it shouldn't be about the price. It should be about the different milestones. But with that said, those are my last questions. I only have one more. If you had to give a message to the strategy investor community in terms of someone like myself that's been in a little bit longer, or someone that's coming in now and they're wrapping their head around the prefers, they're wrapping their head around the leveraged Bitcoin, and they may have concerns about volatility, or they may have concerns about, well, if I buy in now, is strategy going to be a company that's going to be doing this in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? What can you say to them?
Well, I start with thank you, right? The reason I became interested in Bitcoin was only partially and in small part because of its price action. I became interested in Bitcoin because of the underlying technological capabilities and macroeconomic capabilities of the asset class. And I've heard you talk a lot, Adrian. You fundamentally understand the asset class. And so with MSTR or with any of our preferreds, my suggestion is to understand the underlying dynamics of the asset class, not just looking at our price, right? It's truly value investing and understanding what is the value of what you're buying, not just the price action of what you're buying. And if you do that, what do you see? You see a company that has a history, 35-year history of innovating every 5 to 10 years and a true 0 to 1 invention, right? And every decade since our inception, right? What else do you see? You see a truly visionary executive director and founder, Michael Saylor, who is extremely creative and can learn through first principles everything from software to finance to macroeconomics to aeronautical engineering to the history of the world. You have somebody there who is a truly visionary leader who knows how to execute too. And then you have underneath it a team of 1,500 people who want to win like nothing else. And you come visit us, you can go meet our folks. And then on top of that, you have the first and largest, by far, 10x Bitcoin treasury company. And you have a track record of execution through the last 5 years and conviction. We did not sell Bitcoin in 2022, right? And so as you start to look at the underlying characteristics of not the asset class, but the company, MicroStrategy, not strategy, right? You're going to see someone who's extremely transparent, who's very convicted, who has an amazing founder, who has an amazing executive team and execution and team capable of executing. And then you say to yourself, is that what you want to invest in? And then you stack that up against all your other potential investments. Like I like to say, strategy, right, is the Bitcoin of not just Bitcoin treasury companies, but strategy is the Bitcoin of technology companies. And our goal is, to become the Bitcoin of public companies, right? And if you stack the two up side by side, you create a little spreadsheet and look at, why do I like Bitcoin, right? You might realize that each of those have a parallel with why you might want to like strategy. And then you say, if you're that convicted, what do you do with Bitcoin? You buy as much as you can, as often as you can, and you never sell. I'm not saying that's what you should do with our equity, our preferreds, but it gives you the conviction in the company, right? And that takes a little work, right? It's a lot easier than looking at, the trailing 200-day whatever of our stock, but then you become a long-term holder. There are a lot of folks out there who are young and want to make money day trading, and investing, and it's like people who are trying to flip houses in 2005. And they thought they were good at it. No, you're just lucky, right? Like most people, if you're a day trader, you're basically just giving money into the large financial institutions and hedge funds, or you're lucky, right? But if you're really a value investor and you truly understand the underlying characteristics of the company, what we do well, then you go and you just invest and you hold for a while, and then you stack sats or you stack shares, whatever it is. So I suggest anybody who wants to understand Bitcoin or our company better, do the work, right? Put in 1,000 hours on Bitcoin. You could probably get away with 100 hours of strategy, but do the work, right? And then you'll come to a conclusion of where we sit amongst your other potential investments.
I agree. I'm one of the people on X that talks about options trading, but one of the things I tell people over and over and over again that I think gets lost is, if my stack is this big, I'm trading options about that much of it. And it really is true. No matter how smart you are, the market's going to get you at one point or another. And the best strategy, no pun intended, is to find good assets and hold them over the long period of time and educate yourself on them. I think it alleviates a lot of the stress that people feel. But with that said, I want to thank you again for having me out here. This was fantastic. I loved seeing Strategy HQ, meeting you in person again, having an opportunity for us to sit down and talk in more detail. And I'm looking forward to another opportunity to do it again in the future.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for all you've done for the community. You bring a very clear mindset in terms of investing and how to think about Bitcoin and strategy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, guys. Well, that's everything that I have. Phong and I are probably going to chat for another few minutes here, but thank you very much for joining us. And this will be up probably in the next few days. You're currently watching it today on October 20th, but it'll be up probably by the end of this week on the True North channel and on X. So please retweet, and share from there. And we will be bringing you more content in the future. Bye.